let's just start talking about it. Colin Powell is dead, and
Yeah.
that
How about that? Him and a lot of other people.
yeah, with Don Rumsfeld too in the past year, and I mean we're still waiting on Cheney and everything like that. Who knows how many more hearts he could go through, but Colin Powell's dead, and so if you're watching the mainstream media, the one of the reasons I want to talk about this, or even just going through Twitter, like it's pretty positive. He made a mistake on Iraq, but overall he was a really important guy in all of this. And so, Scott, I know that you're not going to say that when I ask you about Colin Powell, and I'll let you start. Maybe at before the Iraq thing though, because I think that's the part that almost nobody knows, is he was
Yeah.
at least somewhat involved in I was reading a piece actually today by Mark Perry and Norman Solomon from back in 2000 about like his involvement with covering up the My Lai massacre, everything he
Right.
did post Vietnam. So let's start there and just go forward.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I guess I want to say something about how strange it is to a libertarian to hear people talk about government officials in I guess the common understanding, right? That whatever violence that they commit with state power is just an entirely different category of morality. It's like if, Zeus on Mount Olympus decides to do something, who the hell are you to question that? A god can kill a man if he wants to. But these guys are just men and not very talented ones. And yet, the worst that you could say about all the people that got killed in this guy's massive killing projects that he was engaged in many different areas of the world. Those are mistakes. Those are differences of opinion. Guy on Twitter said to me yesterday, geez, you can't just demonize your political opponents. But man, there are people who go to life in prison for committing one crime against one person. A lot of them really deserve it, you know? But if you're a government official, there's just, it's like a judge overseeing a corrupt trial where the DA withholds evidence and railroads some guy and the judge just lets it happen. You can't sue him for that. You can't charge him for a crime for that. You can say the judge is an accessory in a kidnapping plot with the DA. They just get away with it. It goes without saying they're immune, not just from the law, but from just even the rules of morality at all. Colin Powell, look, Kyle, he may have killed hundreds of thousands, maybe even more than 1 million people, but you got to understand, we all make mistakes. What? Okay, I get it. I mean, I understand. For people, they go to government school. That's how you learn about it. The first quote of my new book is Bill Clinton says, and this is from a foreignpolicy.com article if people want to look at it. He says, terror means killing and robbery and coercion by people who do not have state authority. And that's it. And so I'll get back to Vietnam in a second, but just directly on that point, it was Colin Powell, the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff during Iraq War I, who oversaw and, implemented the plan to bomb the water, the electricity, all the oil refineries, the trucks, the bridges, the civilian infrastructure of the country. And as I don't know if there are quotes out of his mouth about this. There may be. I should have read his memoirs. There may be, direct quotes from him about this, but certainly military officials under his command or lower than him in the chain of command, sort of. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is a weird position. He's not exactly in the chain of command, but he sort of kind of is. But anyway, his inferiors in the military, if I could put it that way, said, well, yeah, of course. What do you think we were trying to do? Make life easy for the people of Iraq? Of course we're trying to make it harder on them because, hey, after all, he's the dictator of their country. In a way, they're responsible for his actions. And so we're punishing them for that and coercing them. You want your electricity turned back on? You get rid of Saddam and we'll let you turn your electricity back on. And that was what they said. That's terrorism. That's killing innocent civilians in order to coerce a political result, directly targeting them. That's terrorism. But as Bill Clinton said, with state authority, so that's fine. But imagine the shoe on the other foot. Imagine a bunch of Middle East countries ganging up on and attacking a Western European country or America or Canada. Imagine some guy sends some suicide bombers to crash planes into our skyscrapers and justifies it by saying, well, the American people say that they're a democracy. They pay taxes. They're responsible. Those are the exact words of Osama bin Laden, Kyle. It's the exact same thinking of the American government. All he was doing was echoing Colin Powell, his former paymaster, and echoing, people like Madeleine Albright, Clinton's Secretary of State, who helped to continue to implement the
And
sanctions
did you
against
see
Iraq.
that one? I forget who had her on to talk about what a loss Colin Powell was. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like these two are in cahoots together in like this awful, awful crime against the Iraqi people. And then, you bring her on to memorialize him as they're both some kind of heroes is crazy.
Yeah. Well, who else are you going to ask? Antiwar.com?
Yeah.
So, yeah. But now, so going back, I read the piece that you're talking about. So Robert Perry at consortiumnews.com, and who's separate and distinct from Mark Perry, both greats, but just to be clear there.
Yeah. That was my mistake.
And yeah, no problem. But so Robert Perry has this great piece, and there's a guy named, you know what? I'm sorry. Let me look at it because I had it highlighted because I knew I was going to forget the guy's name. It's Tom Glenn. Okay, there's a guy in Vietnam named Tom Glenn. He's an Army officer, and he wrote a letter to the command saying that, listen, there are massive war crimes being committed against the civilian population of South Vietnam right now out here. And it's a widespread thing, and I've seen it myself, and I've heard a lot of stories about it from other groups we've worked with and seen some of them, some of their stuff in action, and something's got to be done here. And Colonel Powell, or maybe Lieutenant Colonel Powell, I forget, he essentially hushed all this up. Instead of saying, oh, God, we got to have an investigation and figure out, he helped lead the cover up on it. And, which is probably one of the things that helped make his career. That he said, well, this guy, he doesn't really know what he's talking about. And he doesn't really have the access to say what's really going on here. And then, it wasn't until later. And I guess the My Lai massacre is, I think if I read this right, Kyle, you can chime in here. You read the same thing as me. If I remember what he wrote in here right, that the My Lai massacre was actually part of this guy's litany of examples. And because they covered that up, it didn't come out until an entire other investigation was spurred later on by entirely different people in America. And then they gave it to Seymour Hersh and all of that. So in other words, he was covering up, people say he covered up My Lai, but he covered up this report about widespread war crimes across southern Vietnam at the hands of American troops, including My Lai. And here's the thing of it. You might be able to see in the background. Oh, I got my awesome Ron Paul art is now covering it up, but it used to be back there. You could see the book with the stripes. That's Kill Anything That Moves by Nick Terse. And it's entirely based on internal Army investigations of their own soldiers' war crimes. That's the only source in it. And it's just sick. It's just sick. And Powell, I've read a few things today, and there are a couple quotes going around on Twitter with quotes from his memoirs and other things where he's explaining that, yeah, of course, we're brutalizing the civilian population there. That's part of our counterinsurgency strategy. Boy, call something a counterinsurgency strategy, and you can do things that make no sense whatsoever. So they're saying, well, it's the people's war, and the guerrillas live among the people, so we got to just disrupt all the people. Like, this is where they coined the cliche that military intelligence is the oxymoron. That, like, you idiots, you're not only the redcoats, but the redcoats, at least, their civilization had spawned this one that was separating away. But you're like the redcoats, to the Indians, the Americans to the Indians, much less the English to the white Anglo-Americans.
Well, the British
away.
To the actual, the Indians, the actual Indians is probably a pretty good example.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. The actual Indians and the American Indians for that matter. And then you're winning their hearts and minds by being absolutely the most ruthless killers in town. And that'll teach them to cross you, huh? I mean, come on. The Strategic Hamlet program what's funny about that is it's almost like forced communism, right? They have all these people, like the Vietnamese not only believed in private property, but they worshipped it because their land was the land of their ancestors going back, and their like ancestor worship was a huge part of their religion. So you think about, how, harshly or intensely Americans identify with their land, especially if it's like their grandfather's land and it's still in their family or something like that. We're talking about people's great, 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 great grandfather's land. And they worship their ancestors' spirits as still alive, watching over them and tied to that land. And then the Americans come and say, yeah, we're going to put you in a strategic hamlet, which is no different than like Stalin rounding people up and forcing them onto a collective farm. Now you're going to farm this land, this worthless, land. And now you're going to suffer under this warlord. And you're going to do all, you're going to be suffering victims. And that's what'll win these people over to want to, support the South Vietnamese government that we're trying to prop up there. I mean, the level of stupidity and insanity and brutality in the Vietnam War and the way that those things work together there, just the absolute ignorance in which these guys went forward with their plans. And then Powell did nothing but justify it. Well, of course we had to go in there and burn all their villages down. These were villages where Viet Cong had been seen. And I read even a quote of him saying, you may have heard of this before, here's some rules of engagement. If a helicopter, and this is like almost perfect paraphrase of his words here. If a helicopter gunner sees a farmer wearing black pajamas and who's a MAM, a military-aged male, a ma'am, if he's a military-aged male and he's out in the field and he's wearing black pajamas, what you do is you shoot near him. And if he runs, then that is indication that he's enemy, and then you can kill him. And then, of course, a lot of times they just kill him right out anyway. But if someone runs from a guy firing an M60 at them from the side of a Huey, then that means that it's the running that indicates their guilt as a member of the insurgency. And then, so, I mean, I don't know, man. It's funny to me how anyone can be like a grown adult and think that this is a way to win a war where you're trying. What's the goal of the war? The goal of the war is to solidify the authority of the puppet government of South Vietnam. And to do that, we got to win the hearts and minds of the people of South Vietnam and make them love this state, make them prefer this state to the evil commies in the north who are trying to take them over. So then what do? Their policy is essentially make themselves worse than the devil and give the South Vietnamese people no point of view possible other than, God, I wish the commies would come and liberate me from these Anglo invaders from overseas, which is exactly what happened and exactly why America lost that war. After killing something between 3 and 5 million people, nobody really knows. And kicking over the domino that they said that they were trying to prevent by, supporting Lon Nol and the corrupt regime in Cambodia to allow the Americans to bomb the hell out of it all the time, which radicalized the entire population, pushed people in the arms of the Khmer Rouge, and completely discredited the rule of the king and allowed the Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot to take over and create a communist dictatorship there. So not that all that was Colin Powell's fault. He's a colonel at the time, but there's a happy participant in it and apologist for it. Well, and he says the rest of that quote, he goes, hey, listen, in a war, these lines of morality between good and evil get blurred. Oh, really? Shooting an unarmed peasant farming in a field. He might be a soldier because he's a military-aged male. If the Nazis did that, we'd call it a war crime. When the Nazis did that, we called it a war crime. That's a war crime. You're not allowed to just massacre innocent people because you think they could maybe be, even though he's not carrying an AK. And which goes to the entire question of waging war in third world countries, occupying these countries and installing and propping up governments over people and waging counterinsurgency campaigns against those who dare resist. How could anyone think that any of these things are going to turn out like in the Pentagon's promises? They haven't.
So, right. So,
and that goes to the rest of his career too. I guess Panama